There is one question that sits right at the center of, well, almost every major decision you will ever make in your life.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the question that kind of shapes the architecture of your career,
Yeah.
right? And the people you choose to love, the way you lead a team, and even just how you process a random Tuesday morning.
A regular Tuesday.
Right. And it's a question I want to pose to you, the listener, right out of the gate today. And that is, who are you, really?
I love that. I mean, it sounds so beautifully simple when you just let it hang in the air like that.
It does.
But the thing is, when you actually force someone to sit down in a quiet room and, answer it honestly,
It's terrifying.
it is. It becomes remarkably intimidating. Most of us will do almost anything to avoid answering it.
Well, because usually when someone asks us that question, we don't actually answer with who we are structurally, do we?
Not at all.
We answer with, like, the roles we've agreed to play.
The labels.
Exactly. We say, I'm a senior marketing director, or I'm a mother of two, or I'm the pragmatic, responsible one in my friend group.
Right, which is just reading the label on the costume.
Yeah, the costume you happen to put on that morning. But today, for this deep dive, we are setting the costumes completely aside.
Love it.
We are not talking about the version of you that shows up when you're, trying to impress a hiring manager.
Or the performer at work.
Exactly. We are going to dig into the deep, structural, unvarnished you.
And we should probably establish right away that this is not just some, abstract, navel-gazing philosophical thought experiment.
Right. There are real stakes here.
Huge stakes. I mean, the friction we experience in life, like those careers that just leave us totally hollowed out by Friday afternoon.
Oh, yeah. The Sunday scaries.
Exactly. Or the relationships that feel like this endless negotiation, that persistent low-grade fever of burnout that so many people have.
It's everywhere.
It is. And it almost always stems from fighting our own internal design without even realizing we're doing it.
Because we just don't know the design.
Right. We make choices that fundamentally contradict our psychological shape, primarily because we don't possess an accurate map of what that shape actually is.
Which perfectly brings us to the mission of today's deep dive. We have spent the entire week intensely analyzing the proprietary architecture behind this premium personality assessment platform.
A really fascinating one.
Super fascinating. It's called Your Personality Blueprint, and you can actually find it at www.yourpersonalityblueprint.com.
Highly recommend checking it out.
Yeah. So our goal today is to completely deconstruct how this platform maps the human psyche.
We're taking it apart piece by piece.
We really are. We want to understand the behavioral psychology of why we misunderstand ourselves so spectacularly badly.
Which we do. We really do.
We do. And we're going to explore the cognitive mechanisms behind how, knowing your precise blueprint can radically transform the way you operate in the world.
It's a game changer.
It really is. So let's start with the blindness. Like, why is the human brain so ill-equipped to simply know itself?
Well, the primary issue is that most of us have never actually been formally introduced to our baseline selves.
That's a wild thought.
But it's true. As you mentioned earlier, we get introduced to our roles very early on.
Right. The smart kid, the quiet kid.
Exactly. And the tragedy of human adaptation is that when you spend enough time wearing a specific costume, say, the perfect employee who never complains,
Oh, I know that one.
or, the dutiful daughter who always mediates family conflict, or the stoic manager who just absorbs everyone else's stress.
Right. You play the part so well.
You do, and you undergo this kind of psychological masking. You adapt to the demands of your environment so effectively that you begin to literally believe the adaptation is your actual identity.
Wow. I imagine that takes an enormous amount of subconscious energy. Like, if you are constantly performing a role that is even slightly out of alignment with your neurobiology, you are basically running a really heavy background application on your mental hard drive all day long.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The cognitive load is just staggering.
It drains your battery.
It completely drains you. And the result of this lifelong performance is the subtle but, very pervasive disconnection that hums beneath everything you do.
Like a static.
Yeah, exactly. You might achieve incredible external markers of success, right?
Yeah.
Rapid promotions, industry accolades, the perfect family home.
It's the stuff that looks great on Instagram.
Right. But the achievements feel strangely hollow. You build a life that looks completely flawless on paper, but living inside, it feels like, I don't know, wearing shoes that are half size too small.
Ouch. That is such a visceral description.
And so you end up in this perpetual cycle of starting over. You pursue a new job, you move to a new city, start a new relationship.
Thinking, this is the one.
Right, convinced that this next external change will finally be the one that makes you feel like the real you.
But changing the scenery doesn't fix the fact that you are basically navigating without a map.
Exactly.
Now, I do want to challenge this premise just a little bit here,
Go for it.
because, I mean, it sounds logical that we might lose track of ourselves internally. But we don't live in a sensory deprivation tank.
Sure.
We exist in society. We get constant daily feedback from the world around us.
Oh, plenty of feedback.
Right. I mean, parents discipline us, teachers grade us, bosses give us performance reviews, partners argue with us.
Constant data points.
Exactly. It seems almost impossible to be completely blind to yourself when society is just constantly holding up a mirror to you.
That's a really fair point.
Shouldn't all that external data eventually assemble into an accurate picture of who we are?
Well, if society were holding up a clear, objective mirror, then yes, absolutely.
But it's not clear.
No, it's not. You aren't standing in front of a flat, objective piece of glass. You are standing in a funhouse.
Oh, interesting.
You're looking at a carnival mirror. The feedback we receive throughout our lives is fundamentally flawed.
How so?
Well, it typically trickles down from 3 highly unreliable sources.
Okay, let's break those down. I want to get into this. What is the first mechanism that's distorting the mirror?
The first, and honestly perhaps the most damaging, is other people's opinions.
Okay, we all care about those.
We care deeply, and from the time we're toddlers, we absorb these declarative statements from the adults and peers around us.
Like what?
People tell you, you're too sensitive, or you're too loud, or you overthink everything.
Oh, I've heard you overthink everything a million times.
Right. But the critical insight here, and this is a massive paradigm shift in how we process criticism, is that those observations are almost always projected through the lens of the observer's own psychological biases.
Wait, really? So they aren't actually analyzing me?
Rarely, they are just reacting to how your behavior interacts with their baseline.
Wow. Okay, give me an example of that.
Sure. So when a colleague says, you're too loud and aggressive in meetings, they are almost never giving you an objective decibel reading of your voice.
Right. They don't have a meter out.
Exactly. Nor are they giving a factual analysis of your strategy. What they're actually saying is, my nervous system requires a quiet, highly structured environment to feel safe, and your spontaneous, high-energy presence is dysregulating me.
Oh my goodness. That makes so much sense.
Right. They're literally handing you a map of their own comfort zone, but they're masking it as a critique of your identity.
That is revelatory.
Yeah.
Seriously. Because if I look back at, every manager who told me I was too distracted or too scattered.
Let me guess, they were highly organized.
Yes. What they were really communicating was their own need for linear, silent focus.
Precisely.
But I was internalizing their limitation as my character flaw.
Which is exactly how the funhouse mirror warps your self-image.
Wow. Okay. What is the second faulty source of feedback?
The second is situational behavior.
Situation.
Yeah. We have this terrible habit of observing ourselves under extreme, anomalous conditions.
Like when we're super stressed.
Exactly. Perhaps we're facing intense financial pressure, or navigating a really toxic workplace, or enduring the agonizing end of a relationship.
When you're just surviving.
Right. And we look at the version of ourselves that emerges during that crisis, and we assume that this stressed, cornered version must be the real us finally exposed.
Wow.
We literally mistake our survival response for our core character.
I fall into this trap constantly. I really do.
Most people do. It's human nature.
Like if I snap at a colleague because, say, I haven't slept in 2 days, my toddler is sick, and we are missing a massive deadline.
A perfect storm of stress.
Total storm. But my immediate internal monologue afterward is, wow, the mask just slipped. I am secretly a deeply angry, impatient person.
You indict your entire character over a moment of exhaustion.
I completely discount the contextual variables.
And yet context dictates a massive percentage of our behavioral output.
It has to, right?
Of course. The way your endocrine system responds to a threat, pumping cortisol and adrenaline into your bloodstream and practically shutting down your prefrontal cortex, that does not define your core personality.
It's just biology.
It is simply an expression of your biology under adverse conditions.
That's a huge relief to hear, honestly.
Judging your true nature by how you act in a crisis is kind of like judging the handling of a sports car while driving it through a muddy swamp.
It's just not the right environment for it.
It is not the full picture at all. Which brings us to the third faulty source, and this one is entirely internal.
Okay, what is it?
Our own self-story.
You mean the inherited narratives we just kind of accept as absolute truth?
Yes, exactly. We absorb these unexamined narratives, often from really fleeting early life experiences.
Like something a teacher said.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You struggle with one math equation in the third grade, a teacher sighs in frustration, and you internally write the script, I am not an analytical person.
And you carry that forever.
Yeah, forever. You internalize the story, I am not creative, or I am too chaotic to be a leader. But these are not empirical facts.
They feel like facts, though.
They do, because they eventually calcify into self-fulfilling prophecies.
Because of neuroplasticity, right?
Exactly. You believe you lack creativity, so you consciously avoid engaging in creative tasks.
Which just proves your point to yourself.
Right. And over time, avoiding those tasks physically weakens the neural pathways associated with divergent thinking, thereby reinforcing your original, completely false belief.
So if we synthesize this, the feedback we receive from others is hopelessly biased by their own needs.
Right.
Our perception of our own behavior is heavily skewed by the extremes of situational stress.
Yep.
And our internal narratives are just a collection of inherited fictions we've literally never bothered to fact check.
That sums it up perfectly.
It is a miracle we can function at all.
It really is.
I mean, it makes perfect sense why human beings are so ravenously hungry for tools that can cut through the noise and just tell them who they are.
Oh, absolutely. The demand is massive.
Look at the cottage industry of personality tests. Millions of people take the old standards every single year.
They do. They're everywhere.
But the argument made by www.yourpersonalityblueprint.com is that these legacy systems are structurally failing us.
And they are.
But how? I mean, if millions of people love them and take them, where is the failure?
Well, the demand for these tools is just proof of a universal human drive for self-understanding. But those older legacy models tend to fail the modern user in four very distinct ways.
Let's hear them.
First, and most fundamentally, they dramatically oversimplify the complexity of human cognition.
They put you in a box.
Exactly. Real human personality is a highly multidimensional, dynamic ecosystem. It's not flat.
Right.
When an assessment collapses all of your behavioral nuance into a static four-letter acronym, or a single number on a wheel, or a color code.
Like telling a grown adult, you are a blue book.
Yes. It offers the illusion of profound insight, but it lacks structural substance. You lose the very nuance that dictates how you actually behave in the messy, real world.
I have absolutely felt that limitation.
Most people have once the novelty wears off.
I've taken tests where the result is a four-letter bucket, and my initial reaction is, okay, this description kind of sounds like me.
The horoscope effect.
Yes. But then a week later, I'm trying to figure out why I'm deadlocked in a vicious argument with my spouse over how we plan our vacations.
And the four letters don't help.
They give me zero actual utility. It feels broad enough to be relatable, but way too vague to be useful.
Which perfectly illustrates the second failure. The language these legacy tests use.
The language.
Yeah. Many of these older assessments were born in mid-20th century academic research labs, or they were designed specifically for corporate human resources departments.
So they're very dry.
Incredibly dry. They deliver their results using cold, clinical, highly detached terminology. They might accurately categorize what you are, but they completely fail to make you feel fundamentally seen.
And that feeling matters.
It's essential. In behavioral psychology, feeling deeply recognized and understood is the necessary catalyst for any actual behavioral change. If the language is sterile, the impact is sterile.
I mean, getting a report that says your primary operational modality is synergistic execution.
Exactly.
It's like, thank you, HR. I'll be sure to put that on my tombstone.
You're right.
It just doesn't resonate with the human experience.
Not at all. And that clinical detachment leads directly to the third failure, a total lack of actionable application.
Oh, yes, leave you hanging.
They view the description as the finish line. They hand you your acronym and leave you entirely on your own to decipher how that clinical label should impact your daily habits.
For your conflict resolution.
Exactly, or your career trajectory. The chasm between receiving an interesting insight and knowing how to practically apply it is where these tools lose all their value.
And what's the fourth failure?
It's simply the delivery mechanism. They offer a clunky, generic, archaic user experience.
Like taking a test in 1998.
Yes, the modern consumer is incredibly sophisticated. They are deeply skeptical of gimmicks and mass-produced quizzes.
They want something sleek.
They expect intelligent, dynamic, premium experiences that adapt to them.
Okay, so the architects behind your personality blueprint recognized these massive gaps in the market,
They did.
and they engineered a totally different approach. To avoid collapsing human complexity into a single bucket, they don't give you a label right out of the gate, do they?
No, they don't.
Instead, they plot your psychological tendencies across 5 independent dimensions or behavioral spectrums.
Which changes everything.
And this is where the underlying cognitive science becomes genuinely fascinating.
Right.
I want us to take the time to really pull apart each of these 5 dimensions
Let's do it.
because the implications are huge.
This multi-dimensional mapping is the core architecture of the platform. Instead of forcing you into a pre-existing box, it evaluates your natural resting state across 5 distinct axes of human behavior.
So let's begin with dimension 1. This evaluates the spectrum between optimistic and realistic.
Right.
We can kind of call this the future orientation.
Yes. This dimension dictates your brain's fundamental relationship with the concept of the future. It is about how you project forward.
Okay, break that down for me.
So individuals who sit on the optimistic end of the spectrum possess a neurological bias toward possibility.
The glass is half full.
More than that. When they look at a blank canvas, a new year, or a new project, their brain immediately and effortlessly scans for what could go right.
They're drawn to the upside.
They are deeply energized by potential. In a boardroom, they are the ones saying, what if we just tried this entirely new approach?
And they aren't worrying about the logistics yet.
Exactly. They do not dwell on structural risks until they are absolutely forced to.
Whereas individuals on the realistic end of the spectrum possess a bias toward probability.
Yes. And we really need to pause here to correct a major societal misunderstanding.
Let's correct it.
Realistic people are not inherent pessimists.
People always assume they are.
They do, and they assume they're unhappy. But many of them are incredibly grounded, joyful individuals.
They just process things differently.
Right. Their cognitive processing operates through the lens of what is historically proven, what is statistically likely, and what is structurally sound.
They want the data.
Their brains automatically calculate the downside risks, the potential points of failure, and the resource constraints before they even allow themselves to consider the potential rewards.
They are managing the baseline.
Exactly. They require empirical evidence before they allocate their enthusiasm.
I like to think of this dimension using a specific mechanical analogy.
Oh, I'd love to hear it.
Think of optimists and realists, like 2 completely different types of radar systems operating on a ship.
Okay, I'm with you.
The optimist radar is exclusively calibrated to ping only when it detects a resource, an island, or a massive opportunity.
The treasure.
Exactly. But the realist's radar operates on a totally different frequency. It is calibrated to ping the exact moment it detects a submerged reef, an incoming storm, or a structural vulnerability in the hull.
The threats.
Right. Now, if you are trying to cross an ocean, whether that means building a life, scaling a business, or raising a family, you mathematically require both radar systems.
You absolutely do.
Because if you only have the optimist's radar, you will confidently steer the ship directly into a hurricane because you were distracted by a beautiful sunset.
And the ship sinks.
And if you only have the realist's radar, you will never leave the harbor in the first place because the ocean is inherently dangerous.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. You need both to survive and thrive.
But the friction.
Oh, the real-world friction this creates is intense because each side fundamentally distrusts the other's radar.
They think the other one is broken.
Yes. If you take a highly optimistic person and force them into a role strictly defined by risk mitigation, let's say a legal compliance officer or an insurance auditor,
Oh, they would be miserable.
they will experience profound psychological suppression. Their natural energy is being actively suffocated every hour of the day.
And on the flip side, if you take a deeply realistic, highly calibrated risk assessor and drop them into the chaotic move fast and break things culture of a seed stage tech startup,
It's a nightmare for them.
they will live in a state of perpetual nervous system arousal. They will look around the office and think, am I the only sane person here? Everyone is cheering, and we're driving straight off a cliff.
They feel permanently unsafe.
So that's how we see the future.
Yes. But while Dimension 1 evaluates how you see the future, it does not dictate how you act in the present.
That is a huge distinction.
It is. Seeing a potential outcome and taking the step toward it are 2 entirely separate cognitive processes. And that gap between evaluating the environment and actually pulling the trigger is exactly what Dimension 2 measures.
So Dimension 2 is the spectrum between bold and cautious.
Risk orientation.
Right. It measures our relationship with uncertainty in the immediate present.
Exactly. Bold individuals are profoundly action-oriented. The defining cognitive marker of a bold person is that they do not require a high threshold of certainty to initiate movement.
They just jump.
They jump. In
Right.
fact, waiting around for 100% certainty or demanding endless layers of data actually causes them physical discomfort.
They hate standing still.
They believe that action itself generates the necessary data. They feel most alive, most engaged when they are pushing into the unknown, testing hypotheses in real time, and adapting on the fly.
And on the other end of the spectrum, cautious individuals are precision-oriented.
Highly precise.
Their underlying philosophy is that taking the right action, armed with exhaustive preparation and comprehensive data, is infinitely superior to taking fast, blind action just for the sake of movement.
Yes, they want to systematically map the territory and mitigate the variables before the risks have a chance to materialize.
They want the blueprint before they build.
Precisely. To an outside observer, their decision-making process might appear slower or more deliberate.
But the output is solid.
Incredibly solid. When a cautious person finally commits to a move, their decisions are remarkably robust. They tend to hold up amazingly well under extreme stress because the foundational logic was so thoroughly stress-tested in advance.
I have to interject here because I think society has a massive, highly destructive bias regarding this specific dimension.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
In modern culture, particularly in Western business and entrepreneurial circles, we completely idolize the bold architect.
We do. We put them on magazine covers.
We worship the founder who bets their entire life savings on a napkin sketch. We make glossy documentaries about them.
Hustle culture loves the bold.
But we subtly and sometimes overtly look down on the cautious individual.
We really do.
We label them as bureaucratic foot draggers, or we say they lack vision, or we accuse them of being crippled by overanalysis.
You are identifying a deeply harmful cultural imbalance.
It drives me crazy.
The idolization of blind boldness ignores the catastrophic wreckage it often leaves behind.
The failed companies, the burned out teams.
Exactly. Cautious people serve as the vital biological immune system for any organization, community, or family unit.
They keep things running.
They are the ones who read the fine print, ensure the bridge won't collapse under a heavy load, and prevent massive unnecessary damage. The true tragedy of Dimension 2 is the immense amount of judgment bold and cautious people hurl at each other.
Because they speak totally different languages regarding risk.
They do. The bold person looks at their cautious partner or colleague and says, "You are paralyzed by fear. You are missing the window of opportunity."
And what does the cautious person say?
The cautious person looks at the bold individual and says, "You are reckless. You are creating chaotic, completely avoidable messes that I will inevitably have to clean up."
And they're both convinced they're right.
But both judgments are categorically false. They are simply operating from fundamentally different neurological orientations toward the unknown. Neither is broken. They are just calibrated differently.
That reframing is so liberating. You know,
Yeah.
you're not a reckless cowboy and you're not a paralyzed coward. You just require different levels of data to feel secure in your movement.
Exactly.
Okay, let's shift gears to Dimension 3, which evaluates the spectrum between collaborative and independent.
This is a fun one.
And before we get into the weeds here, I want to clear up a massive misconception.
Please do.
This is not just a rebranding of extroversion versus introversion, is it? We are not talking about whether you enjoy cocktail parties or prefer staying home with a book.
I am so glad you clarified that. No, this dimension is entirely focused on cognitive style.
Cognitive style.
Yes, it is an evaluation of how your brain generates its absolute highest quality thinking and manages cognitive load.
Okay, so how does a collaborative thinker operate?
Collaborative individuals literally use external dialogue as their primary processing mechanism.
They process out loud.
Exactly. For them, a conversation is not a tool used to communicate an idea they have already perfectly formulated in isolation.
Right.
The conversation is the actual crucible where the idea is born.
They literally have to hear it out loud to know what they think.
Yes. They require the dynamic friction of bouncing thoughts off another human being to see what shape those thoughts naturally take.
They need the ping pong match.
They do. They use the facial expressions, the interruptions, and the immediate feedback of others to organize their own internal data. They feel a surge of creative energy and cognitive clarity when they are embedded in a rapid-fire exchange.
Yeah. These are the people who constantly pop their head into your office and say, hey, can I just talk at you for a second to figure this out?
Yes, you are their whiteboard.
That is so true. Now, contrast that with the independent thinker.
Independent individuals require physical and mental solitude to effectively process complex data.
They need the quiet.
If an independent thinker is trying to solve a problem and you interrupt them with a mandatory high-energy group brainstorming session,
Oh, no.
you are not helping them. You are actively disrupting their cognitive flow.
You're breaking their concentration.
Entirely.
Yeah.
They need to gather the raw materials, retreat into the quiet architecture of their own minds, build the conceptual model without external interference, and then once the structure is sound, they are fully prepared to engage and present their findings.
They require deep autonomy to do their best work.
Yes, deep autonomy.
If we extrapolate this to the modern corporate environment, the implications are actually horrifying.
Oh, modern offices are a disaster for this.
Over the last 20 years, we have systematically torn down the walls in our workplaces to build these massive, echoing, open-plan offices.
The worst trend.
We have instituted mandatory daily stand-up meetings, and we demand immediate responses on Slack. For an independent thinker, an open-plan office isn't just annoying. It is a form of sustained psychological torture.
It really is.
Their working memory is constantly being hijacked by visual and auditory interruptions.
Their cognitive capacity is being drained by the environment before they even begin the actual work.
Exactly. But then the pendulum swings the other way, too.
Right.
You take a highly collaborative thinker and you reward them with a promotion that sticks them in a remote, isolated, highly siloed role where they just stare at a screen for 9 hours a day.
And they wither away.
You have effectively cut off their oxygen supply.
Yeah.
Without the external stimulation of a team, their brilliance just dies on the vine.
Which is precisely why an accurate blueprint is non-negotiable for anyone in a leadership position.
You have to know your team.
You must. It is not a character flaw for an employee to require external collaboration, nor is it a character flaw to demand isolated independence.
It's just their hardware.
Once you map your team's blueprint across Dimension 3, you stop trying to force your independent deep thinkers into chaotic group brainstorms, and you stop isolating your collaborative processors. You design the workflow to match the cognitive machinery.
That makes so much sense.
Oh.
It really does. Okay, let's move to Dimension 4.
The philosophical one.
Right. In our notes reviewing the platform's architecture, you highlighted this as the most philosophically rich dimension of the entire assessment.
It absolutely is.
It is the spectrum between romantic and practical. The search for meaning.
Yes. And just like we had to redefine collaborative, we need to be very precise with our terminology here.
Because romantic doesn't mean roses and chocolates.
Exactly. When your personality blueprint uses the word romantic, they are not referring to someone who enjoys candlelight dinners or grand cinematic gestures of affection.
What does it mean then?
They are using the term in its classical philosophical sense. Romantic individuals operate on a fundamentally teleological level.
Teleological.
Yes, they are guided by meaning, depth, overarching purpose, and beauty. When a romantic is faced with a new project, a career move, or a life choice, the very first question their brain automatically generates is, does this matter in the grand scheme of things?
They're hunting for the why.
Exactly. They are drawn to vision and significance. If a romantic individual successfully executes a highly efficient, highly profitable project, but the project itself lacks a deeper, resonant meaning or fails to improve the human condition in some way,
It feels empty to them.
the success will feel entirely hollow. The efficiency does not justify the effort if the purpose is absent.
And what directs the thinking of the practical individual?
Practical individuals operate through the lens of pragmatism, function, execution, and efficiency.
The bottom line.
When faced with the exact same project or life choice, their brain bypasses the philosophical questions entirely and immediately asks, does this actually work?
Wow.
They possess this incredible, almost surgical gift for cutting through theoretical fluff and emotional rhetoric to locate the tangible, executable solution.
So they don't care about the poetry. They care about the plumbing.
That is a perfect distillation. To a practical person, a beautiful, deeply meaningful, highly poetic idea that cannot actually be executed in the real world is not inspiring.
It's annoying.
It is intensely frustrating. It is a waste of resources. They require their energy to yield a concrete, measurable result.
I can vividly imagine the friction this dimension causes, particularly in domestic life.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's say you have a couple trying to buy a house.
A classic stressor.
The romantic partner walks into a 100-year-old Victorian home, sees the stained glass windows, and starts talking about the history, the soul of the house, and the memories they will create in the garden.
They're visualizing the life there.
Right. But the practical partner walks into the exact same house, looks at the ceiling, and says, "The roof is sagging, the plumbing is original, and the heating bill will bankrupt us."
And immediately the judgments begin.
Right. The romantic partner feels like the practical partner is a cold, unfeeling robot who wants to destroy their dreams with a spreadsheet.
A dream killer.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Meanwhile, the practical partner is looking at the romantic and thinking, "You are completely ungrounded, you have lost your mind, and you're going to drive us into financial ruin because you like the color of the front door."
And the platform's core message is that neither is wrong.
They just have different priorities.
They simply assign different weights to the value of meaning versus the value of function. The romantic ensures the life they build is actually worth living, while the practical ensures the life they build doesn't structurally collapse.
You need both to have a good house.
Exactly. If you do not understand this dimension, you will experience a permanent, exhausting disconnect with anyone in your life who sits on the opposing side of the spectrum.
Which brings us to the fifth and final dimension. And I think this one is going to resonate deeply with a very specific subset of our listeners.
I think so too.
Dimension 5 evaluates the spectrum between focused and explorative, the paradigm of depth versus breadth.
This dimension measures how you sustain your energy over time.
Okay, well, let's start with focused.
Focused individuals thrive on intense commitment. They are biologically wired for depth, mastery, and most importantly, completion.
They have to finish it.
They want to select a single domain, a single project, or a single subject, dive incredibly deep into the nuances of it, and see it all the way through to the absolute end.
The finish line is the goal.
Yes. For a focused type, the physical act of finishing a task, checking the final box, publishing the paper, delivering the product triggers a massive release of serotonin and endorphins.
They get a chemical high from finishing.
They experience a profound, almost physical sense of satisfaction and cognitive closure.
So if the focused person gets their neurochemical reward from the finish line, where does the explorative person get theirs?
The explorative individual thrives on curiosity, variety, and the electric energy of the beginning.
The starting line.
Exactly. They are biologically energized by the novelty of starting something new, by following unexpected intellectual threads, and by immersing themselves in a completely foreign domain.
The discovery phase.
Their dopamine rush comes from the discovery. Once they have mapped the territory, once they understand generally how the thing works, the novelty wears off.
And they get bored.
The dopamine drops, and their cognitive energy naturally, effortlessly migrates toward the next unknown frontier. For them, the act beginning is every bit as satisfying as finishing is for the focused type.
Okay, I have to stop here and speak directly to the listener for a second.
Go ahead.
If you sit on the explorative end of this spectrum, you have almost certainly spent your entire adult life carrying around a really heavy backpack of guilt.
Oh, a ton of guilt.
Modern society highly values productivity, and we have narrowly defined productivity as the ability to complete tasks.
Which is so limiting.
You have probably been labeled as flaky, scattered, or afraid of commitment. You probably have a closet full of half-finished hobbies, the acoustic guitar you played for 3 months, the Python coding boot camp you abandoned halfway through.
The novel you wrote 4 brilliant chapters of before losing interest?
Yes, you have been told that your inability to finish is a character defect. But what your personality blueprint reveals is that this is not a bug in your software. It is a profound, incredibly valuable design feature.
It truly is. If we analyze the trajectory of human history, some of our greatest innovators, artists, and scientific disruptors were profoundly explorative.
Give me an example.
Look at someone like Leonardo da Vinci.
Not perfect example.
He rarely finished his paintings. He was constantly abandoning art to study anatomy, and abandoning anatomy to study engineering, and abandoning engineering to study fluid dynamics.
He was all over the place.
But his genius did not emerge from executing a single repetitive task for 40 years. His genius emerged specifically from his ability to move fluidly between completely disparate domains, allowing him to connect dots that no one else could see.
Because no one else had explored that broadly.
Exactly. He had the ultimate breadth. On the other side of the coin, Focused individuals are sometimes unfairly dismissed as rigid or narrow-minded,
Right, which isn't fair either.
when in reality, their unique ability to sustain attention and go astonishingly deep is the only mechanism that creates true world-class mastery.
You need both.
You need the explorative mind to discover the new continent, and you need the focused mind to build the lasting cities upon it.
So we have thoroughly unpacked these 5 spectrums: optimistic versus realistic, bold versus cautious, collaborative versus independent, romantic versus practical, and focused versus explorative.
That's the full map.
Abstractly, the cognitive science behind this makes perfect sense. But the human mind is not just a collection of abstract spectrums.
No, it's not.
How does the architecture of www.yourpersonalityblueprint.com actually synthesize all of these moving parts into a singular, recognizable human identity? Like, how do we translate dimensions into a holistic profile?
That synthesis is where the algorithmic power of the platform really becomes evident.
Okay, how does it work?
The system takes your specific plotting points across those 5 dimensions and generates a unique 5-letter identifier.
Okay.
That specific code then maps directly onto one of 32 distinct psychological archetypes.
And the naming convention they use for these 32 archetypes is incredibly deliberate, isn't it?
Very deliberate.
It isn't just a random assortment of flattering adjectives. It follows a very specific linguistic structure. The word "the," followed by a descriptor, followed by a role.
Yes. For example, the visionary creator, or the strategic architect, or the reliable builder.
Which sounds very grounded.
It is. The inclusion of the definitive article "the" is a psychologically potent choice. It signals structural recognition.
It gets a weight.
Exactly. It essentially tells the user, this is not just a random quirk of your personality. This is a real, historically recognized, highly defined way of moving through the world.
It normalizes you.
Yes. The descriptor adjective captures the essence of your energy, and the role noun defines your functional utility in society. When a user first sees their architect name, it typically bypasses their logical brain and creates an immediate, visceral sense of relief and recognition.
Let's dive into the anatomy of the actual report the platform generates, because calling it a report almost feels like a disservice.
It's much more than that.
It is not a quick, generic paragraph you skim in 2 minutes. It is a dense, comprehensive manual. And one of the most striking features is what they call the extended mirror.
Ah, the extended mirror. This is a deeply immersive, highly detailed narrative of your internal life.
And it's written differently than most.
What makes it unique is the perspective from which it is written. It uses the second person. It exclusively uses the word you.
Oh, interesting.
Instead of clinically describing you from the outside in, it describes how you experience the world from the inside out.
That's a big shift.
It traces your specific thought patterns, your secret frustrations, and your unspoken motivations.
Which must be kind of surreal to read.
Users consistently report that reading it doesn't feel like receiving a clinical diagnosis. It feels as though a highly perceptive observer has been secretly reading their diary for a decade and is finally explaining their own soul back to them.
Wow.
It accomplishes that vital goal we discussed earlier, making the user feel profoundly seen.
And what I appreciate is that it absolutely does not pander to your ego.
No, not at all.
It includes a section outlining your core strengths and your blind spots, and it is bracingly honest.
Very direct.
It provides a compassionate but unsparing accounting of exactly where you are likely to stumble, how you accidentally alienate people, and where your natural tendencies become liabilities.
There is no cruelty, but there is also no sugarcoating.
But this raises a really critical question about the system's mechanics.
Okay, what's that?
Let's say I take the assessment, and on the bold versus cautious dimension, my answers put me practically dead center. Like I'm 51% bold and 49% caution.
Right in the middle.
Does the algorithm just round up, force me into the bold box, and pretend that the result is an absolute truth?
That is a phenomenal question because it touches on the mathematical integrity of the platform. This is where your personality blueprint employs the concept of epistemic honesty.
Epistemic honesty.
Yes, which is handled through a feature called the confidence score. Unlike legacy tests that artificially inflate their own certainty to appear more authoritative, this platform treats the user like an intelligent, nuanced adult.
How does it do that?
Along with your archetype, it provides a confidence score of high, medium, or emerging for every single dimension.
How do those levels break down in practice?
So, a high score indicates that your behavioral pattern was incredibly pronounced and consistent. The algorithm is highly certain this is your baseline.
You answered strongly one way.
Exactly. But a medium or emerging score means your data points sit closer to the center line. It indicates that you have access to both sides of the spectrum, or perhaps you are currently navigating a major life transition that is demanding new behaviors from you.
So it admits when it's not absolutely certain.
By exposing the math, the platform honors the complexity and fluidity of your answers rather than forcing a false, rigid binary.
I love that. It admits that human beings are not static monuments. We are living, adapting organisms.
We shift over time.
And speaking of fluidity, we absolutely have to discuss this secondary archetype feature. Because when I was reviewing the platform's architecture, this concept completely blew my mind.
It is arguably the most innovative feature of the entire system.
Walk me through it.
The platform's engine analyzes your five-dimensional scores and identifies your weakest link, the single dimension where your score was closest to the 50-50 center line.
The one you were most neutral on.
Exactly. It then mathematically flips that one dimension to the opposing side, revealing your secondary archetype.
Wait, let me challenge that for a second.
Sure.
If I have a primary identity, but the system also says I have a completely different weekend version of myself that emerges in different contexts, doesn't that just prove that the older personality tests were right to be vague?
How so?
Doesn't a secondary archetype prove the human personality is too fluid, too deeply context-dependent to ever be accurately mapped?
It is a fair challenge, but it really misunderstands the physics of personality.
Okay, tell me why.
Think of it like a planet's gravity. Your primary archetype is your center of gravity. It is where you naturally settle when all external forces are removed.
Your default state.
Yes, but you are not locked in a vacuum. When you move into a specific context, say, you go from managing a high-stress corporate crisis on a Tuesday to having a relaxed brunch with your oldest, most trusted friends on a Sunday.
The environment totally changes.
And your nervous system downregulates. That relaxation allows your secondary, less dominant traits to come online.
Oh, I see.
The secondary archetype doesn't prove that personality is random. It proves that personality has predictable shading and neighboring states. It gives you permission to be multifaceted without being lost.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. It's not a contradiction. It's a neighboring frequency.
Beautifully put.
And to synthesize all of this, the platform uses what it calls the insight engine, right? Because none of these traits exist in total isolation.
Exactly. Human psychology operates on the principles of Gestalt theory. The whole is fundamentally different than the mere sum of its parts.
They interact with each other.
The insight engine understands that dimensional traits multiply rather than add.
Give me an example of that multiplication.
For example, being optimistic means one thing, but the engine calculates the difference between an optimistic person who is also bold versus an optimistic person who is cautious.
Oh, those are two very different optimists.
Completely different. The optimistic, bold person will aggressively launch a new company based on a gut feeling. They see the upside and jump.
And the optimistic, cautious person.
They will feel incredibly positive about the new company's potential, but they will spend 6 months drafting a flawless business plan before even registering the domain name.
They see the upside, it require a map first.
Exactly. The engine calculates the chemical reaction between your traits to produce your unique behavioral fingerprint.
All right, let's pivot the conversation here, because as utterly fascinating as this psychological map is, self-knowledge is completely useless if it just sits in a PDF file on your desktop.
Completely useless.
We need to talk about application. How does possessing this exact blueprint actually change the rough territory of your daily life? Let's start with the most complex arena of all, love and relationships.
Oh, relationships. We operate under a pervasive, highly romanticized myth in our culture that love is enough.
The fairy tale?
Yes. The narrative is that if two people just care about each other deeply enough, their good intentions will magically smooth over any practical differences.
Which is lovely, but not true.
The empirical reality of couples counseling shows us that invisible, unarticulated personality friction slowly, methodically erodes connection over time.
We touched on this with a house hunting example.
But let's look at another classic pairing. Imagine an optimistic, explorative partner who is deeply in love with a realistic, focused partner.
Oh boy, the classic pairing of the kite and the anchor. That is a recipe for absolute fireworks.
It is, and without an accurate map, those fireworks become incredibly destructive.
How does the anchor see the kite?
To the realistic focused partner, the optimistic explorative partner appears to be a chaotic, irresponsible flake.
Ouch.
They are constantly changing their career goals, starting new projects they never finish, and seemingly ignoring all financial risks.
And how does the kite see the anchor?
Meanwhile, the explorative partner looks at the realistic focused partner and sees a rigid, depressing wet blanket who systematically shoots down every dream and refuses to experience the joy of spontaneity.
They start to resent each other.
Because they don't understand the underlying neurobiology, they end up pathologizing each other. They literally start to think, my partner is fundamentally broken.
But the moment they both take the assessment at www.yourpersonalityblueprint.com, the entire narrative shifts.
Overnight.
They suddenly possess a shared, objective vocabulary. The explorative partner isn't intentionally trying to be difficult or unstable. Their brain is literally energized by breadth and novelty.
And the focused partner isn't intentionally trying to be cruel or controlling. Their nervous system simply requires depth and risk mitigation to feel safe.
It removes the malice.
Exactly. They can stop treating each other as adversaries to be defeated or projects to be fixed and start negotiating a daily rhythm that honors both of their structural designs.
It completely transforms the mechanics of conflict resolution, doesn't it?
Oh, totally. Think back to the collaborative versus independent cognitive styles we discussed.
Right.
When a conflict arises, the collaborative partner's biological imperative is to talk out the argument immediately, right there in the hallway, because externalizing the conflict is the only way they can process the surge of emotion.
They have to resolve it out loud.
But the independent partner, flooded with adrenaline, feels completely overwhelmed by the sensory input of the argument and desperately needs to retreat into solitude to process the data internally.
And if they are blind to these dimensions, the cycle becomes incredibly toxic.
How so?
Well, the independent partner walks out of the room to process, and the collaborative partner perceives that as abandonment. So they follow them into the next room, demanding they talk.
And the independent partner now feels hunted and trapped.
So they shut down completely or lash out. Just knowing this one single-dimensional difference can literally save a marriage.
It creates a protocol.
Right. You develop a protocol. You agree in advance. Okay, when we fight, the independent partner gets a guaranteed 2-hour timeout in a quiet room to process. But they must promise to come back to the table after 2 hours so the collaborative partner can talk it out.
Precisely. The blueprint turns judgment into structural compassion.
That is beautiful. Now, if we take these exact same dimensions and apply them to work and career, the implications are just as massive.
Maybe even more so for some people.
Because a staggering number of professionals walk around believing they are incompetent at their jobs, when in reality they possess immense talent, but they are simply operating in the wrong biological habitat.
Yes. Let's map this out practically. Your bold versus cautious dimension should absolutely dictate your industry risk tolerance.
Give me an example.
If you are a highly cautious archetype and you accept a lucrative job at a decentralized crypto startup where the regulatory landscape and the core strategy change every 48 hours.
You are going to be clinically burned out in a month.
Not because you lack intelligence or work ethic, but because your nervous system is screaming at you that you are structurally unsafe.
And we can see the exact same dynamic with the romantic versus practical dimension, right?
Absolutely. This dictates the cultural DNA of the organization you should join.
So for a romantic,
A deeply romantic archetype fundamentally requires a mission. They need to work for an NGO, a nonprofit, or a company whose product creates a tangible social good.
and if they don't,
If you take that romantic and give them a highly paid executive role in a massive metrics-driven logistics corporation where the singular ultimate goal is increasing the quarterly margin by 2%, their soul will slowly die.
even if they're good at it.
They might be highly competent at executing the tasks, but the lack of teleological meaning will eventually crush their spirit.
And the reverse is equally true. If you put a highly practical, execution-oriented builder into an airy-fairy philosophical think tank, where everyone sits around on beanbag chairs discussing vision, but no one ever actually ships a product to market.
That practical person will pull their hair out in frustration.
The overarching takeaway here is profoundly liberating. You might not be failing. You might just be a strategic architect, trapped inside a visionary creator's ecosystem.
Finding the correct habitat changes everything.
It really does. But I want to push into the concept of personal growth now. Because one of the traps of personality tests is that they can become a crutch.
They absolutely can. This is just who I am.
Right. People say, well, I'm an introvert, so I never have to speak up.
Mhm.
The blueprint doesn't just tell you to be complacent with your baseline, does it? It actively pushes you.
That is the crucial difference between validation and growth. Generic self-help advice is incredibly frustrating and usually fails because it treats the human psyche like a teardown.
Like you have to gut the whole house.
Yes, it basically tells you that you need to renovate your entire psychological house all at once. It says, wake up at 5 a.m., be more disciplined, be more imaginative, network more, meditate.
It is exhausting and completely unfocused.
The platform avoids this entirely by utilizing a feature called the growth edge.
Okay, tell me about the growth edge.
Because it knows the exact architecture of your specific archetype, it points you directly to the exact load-bearing wall in your psyche that actually requires reinforcing.
Walk me through a specific example of that.
Let's return to the visionary creator archetype. This is someone who is highly optimistic, highly explorative, and highly collaborative.
They sound fun.
They are. Their mind is a perpetual fountain of brilliant, disruptive, lateral ideas. If they read a generic self-help book, it might tell them to unleash their imagination or think outside the box.
But they don't need that.
No, the blueprint knows that their imagination is not the problem. In fact, they have an overabundance of it. Their specific growth edge is the gritty, unglamorous mechanics of completion.
Because they're explorative.
Exactly. They do not need another brainstorming session. They need to learn the painful, tedious, deeply uncomfortable art of staying with one single, boring idea long enough to actually execute it into reality.
They need to learn to endure the finish line.
Perfectly said.
And what about someone with a completely different architecture, like a focused, cautious thinker?
Their growth edge is entirely different. A generic productivity hack telling them to prepare more would actually be destructive.
Because they already over-prepare.
Exactly. They do not need more preparation time, and they certainly do not need more focus. Their bottleneck is their relationship with uncertainty.
So what is their edge?
Their growth edge is learning the emotional tolerance for moving forward when the data is incomplete. They need to practice taking action before they feel 100% ready.
Because imperfect action is better than perfect paralysis.
Right. Realizing that imperfect momentum-building action is vastly superior to heavily researched paralysis. The blueprint targets the exact bottleneck restricting your growth.
That is incredibly actionable. And it ties seamlessly into the platform's under-pressure profile.
The stress modeling.
Yes, the system actually models and predicts how your specific archetype will biologically and psychologically respond to acute stress. To me, this is the true genesis of advanced emotional intelligence.
It is the foundation of it.
Because emotional intelligence isn't just realizing, oh, I am currently sad. It is the ability to say, I am an independent, cautious archetype currently operating under extreme pressure. Therefore, I know my instinctual baseline response will be to isolate myself from my team, retreat into my office, and endlessly overanalyze the data in an attempt to regain control.
Recognizing the pattern.
Yes, because I know that is my pattern, I can consciously interrupt it, step out of my office, and ask for help.
Exactly. It facilitates the transition from reacting unconsciously to your biology to responding with conscious, strategic awareness. It gives you the space between the stimulus and the response.
Okay, as we near the end of this deep dive, I want to address the mechanics of the user experience.
Important topic.
Because extracting this level of incredibly precise psychological data is notoriously difficult. Human beings are exceptional liars, especially to themselves.
We really are.
How does www.yourpersonalityblueprint.com prevent users from subconsciously or consciously gaming the system? We have all taken those corporate assessments where we know exactly which answers make us look like the perfect, flawless, highly productive superstar.
Oh, absolutely. Overcoming the social desirability bias is the white whale of behavioral psychology.
The bias to look good.
Yes, and the assessment is brilliantly engineered to counteract that exact instinct. The test consists of 50 questions delivered via a very sleek, intuitive, mobile-first interface.
What's the trick?
The genius lies in the linguistic framing of the prompts. In a traditional legacy test, it is glaringly obvious which answer is the correct or productive one and which answer exposes a flaw.
Like, do you work hard or are you lazy?
Right. But on this platform, every single question forces a choice between two equally valid, equally thoughtful, highly positive responses.
So you cannot simply select the option that inflates your ego, because both options make you look fantastic, just in entirely different ways.
Precisely. If you ask someone, are you a hard worker or are you lazy? Everyone says they are a hard worker.
Obviously.
But if you ask them to choose between, I am energized by bringing a team together to reach consensus, versus, I am energized by retreating to synthesize complex data into a perfect strategy,
Oh, wow.
the user has to make a genuine, difficult choice between two positive orientations.
You have to choose what actually feels like you.
This forced choice methodology strips away the aspirational ego. It bypasses who you wish you were and mathematically captures the actual structural psychological pattern of who you are. It is an algorithm designed for truth.
So what does this all mean? If we zoom out and synthesize this entire journey we've taken today in this deep dive, the architecture behind your personality blueprint is not designed to box you in.
Not at all.
It is not handing you a generic sterilized label so you can use it as a convenient excuse to avoid personal growth. It is providing you with a rigorous, deeply multidimensional map of your internal operating system.
It equips you with the fundamental knowledge of yourself that you were never formally taught in school.
Which is a shame.
It illuminates the invisible currents that drive your grandest choices, the hidden frictions that fuel your daily frustrations, and the specific environments that have the power to ignite your deepest energy.
And that leads me to the final lingering thought I want to leave you, the listener, with today. Think back to the very beginning of this deep dive.
The funhouse mirror.
Yes. Think about that distorted carnival mirror you've been staring into for years. The warped reflections fed to you by the projections of others, the stress of toxic environments, and the inherited fictions of your own self-story. We have established that a true blueprint can smash that mirror and show you your baseline.
It gives you your center of gravity.
But if the platform is sophisticated enough to track your emerging traits, the subtle shifts in your center of gravity as you adapt to new challenges, it begs a fascinating, almost haunting question.
What's that?
Human beings are not static monuments. We are highly neuroplastic organisms constantly responding to our environments. If you fully accept your design today and build a life perfectly suited to it, that life will inevitably change you. The experiences will remap your brain.
You evolve.
So as you evolve over the next 10, 20, or 30 years, will the precise blueprint that perfectly describes your soul today eventually belong to a complete stranger? And if so, how many different versions of you are waiting to be introduced?